Greetings all, it's Gerald Clark with Seven Planet Broadcasting, and I'm very happy to announce that Julian Polzin is going to be working with me again today. And I think we're going to do something a little different, right, Julian? Say hello to everybody. I don't want to do a long monologue and not let you talk here.
All right. Hello, guys. Yeah, well, I think we want to go a bit deeper into certain topics. Yeah, touch the more complicated stuff. Yeah, instead of scratching the surface, and we'll see where it goes.
Well, I wouldn't say our last conversation was anything like scratching the surface. I actually was reading some of the feedback from people that heard our show. Usually listening to you while I had my mouth shut was better, but that was like community therapy in a way. And there was some people claimed that they felt like there were pieces in that discussion that led to activation for them, whatever that means for them. You know what I'm saying? So, and I actually noticed that when we listened to the show afterwards, that I did have a sense where I felt, I don't know, a little bit lighter, a little bit freer. There were some things I was holding on to relative to expectations about being able to help a family member or friends, right, in this path. And as soon as I got kind of clear in my mind, I knew it, but hearing it with you while we were talking together, and that I really heard it. And I was like, oh, of course. And it really made me relax about, I guess, the mission, whatever your mission is, right? So didn't take it so seriously. How's the audio? Are we doing okay?
Yeah, we're doing fine. Well, the mission is the story, is it not?
It is. Well, you know, this has come up multiple times before. We like to think that we're working so hard and we're overcoming all these obstacles in order to help people so they can be where we're at, right? Which is a total ego trip. But
absolutely.
at the same time, do we not enjoy going through this life journey and then sharing the pieces with it? That it's fun for us. We like that, right?
Right.
So we have to just be honest about that. That's why we do it, you know. And everybody does that.
Well, it depends if there is a hidden expectation, you know. So let's say when you say the mission, this is the story, right? If you attach to the story, to the outcome of the story, you set yourself up for suffering.
Right.
But you can participate in the story no matter what the outcome of the story is. Because the thing is, if you think about outcomes, you trap your thought process in time. And this is the reason why a lot of people do not have spiritual experiences, because they're constantly concerned with time, but time is the trap. So if I think about past and future, I cannot realize the timeless part of myself. So the intuitive me that is in a state of knowing, and being becomes knowing then. There is no distance between being and knowing. Yeah? Only under the ego illusion, if I experience myself as separate from my surroundings, as separate from consciousness in general, then I think I own knowledge. But it's just conceptual, it's an abstraction. When I come into a deeper conscious state, this knowing is intuitive, because being and knowing are one. There is no distance.
Right. Actually, you bring up a really great topic. And first of all, I think what Julian and I seem to like to do is we don't naturally defend beliefs. We like to explore a topic, move it along a reasonable path, and see where it lands. And then it's a stopping point in the dialogue. Is that how you see it, Julian? Because that's how I see this process.
Well, to me, one thing is very clear: all beliefs are illusions.
Well, and so when you get to a data place in your exploration of a topic as part of a dialogue, I don't see that as the truth, or possibly it's more true, less true, but it's just data and a stopping point that can help you in your perspective, I think. And what I want to explore today through kind of a dialogue with you is some couple of deep things. First of all, we agreed to somewhat provide an umbrella to, I don't know, channel the different discussions that we're going to probably have together into initially a concept and a container envelope, if you will, of the evolution of consciousness, whatever that is. So today, minimally, what I want to make sure we do, if we're going to do that we kind of have a little dialogue about evolution and consciousness, whether it's material or physical, and really start to ground this so that we can have a dialogue and be working from it doesn't have to be at the same place, but a place where we can communicate with the same language and understanding. Because I mean, we're separated by thousands of miles, and your primary language is German, and my primary language is English, even though you probably speak other languages, and so do I, right? So as part of this dialogue is coming up with something that is a model that we can both agree on, like the definition of consciousness, the definition of evolution, for instance. And then when we talk about these things, we at least have a common understanding, a thread where we're moving this dialogue along together. And I think that might be a lot of fun for us, given the way that we both view information. So what do you think?
But in general, of course, like playing with concepts can be very useful, because in a sense, nowadays, our languages have evolved. We have way more vocabulary. Yeah, humans have progressed scientifically. So now when we have mystical experiences, for example, we can speak of it in terms of dimensions, vibrations, so on and so forth. So we are developing a more evolved language. We can kind of close in on these territories with language, but still language is a limitation. So if someone wants to know, knowing is something that we cannot really penetrate with concepts. That is not possible. Okay. The concepts come later. The concepts are a translation of the knowing. So we're trying to verbalize it, we're trying to communicate it, but in truth, this is already a limitation. This is already a reduction of the original experience. Does that make sense?
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I was going to say that a fact is only a fact in a theory when we're working in scientific hypotheses. Whereas what you just said, I totally agree with that. And it goes back to the idea of how do you find something that's true when it's being sent through the filtered mind that's been conditioned based on whatever brain software you're running in your culture. So if you want, yes. I'll actually kind of guide this and we can kind of go through this. So that first question I had for us was, how can we know truth when we hear it, given we have conditioned minds? So is truth even accessible via intuition? And you said you're going to expound a little bit on intuition, which I totally agree. After your mind processes some data, maybe it sees a hypothesis, has a dialogue. At some point, it goes from the brain where it's processing it into a place where we subject it to, is this true or false for us, right? And this runs through, so the idea of being able to find the truth when your mind has been conditioned is the question, first of all, in itself. So, and the next part of that is there a primitive organ beyond the brain involved with information processing? And I found this kind of to be true. And I can't really explain it in terms of other than reptilian biology and our primitive organs. Maybe you have some other input to put on that. And before I jump in and we start defining these things, I want to say that in the Emerald Tablets, I noticed that Thoth, and there was also in the Divine Pymander, where he's talking about how we're constructed and that we've been given an aspect of the creator of all as part of our mind, so that when we find something interesting, it's probably because it's interesting because it leads back to the filter through which leads us to a higher state of consciousness, is my premise. So that's another portion that I wanted to throw in there, is that I think part of our intuition is related to our constructs, genetically, biologically, and that how whoever created us left a mark and a filter through which we oftentimes have a preconditioning that cannot be erased, that I know of. So anyway, so as we crawl into this, here's the question then. Can the truth be accessed, number one, with a conditioned mind alone? Two, no mind only, or non-local reality, whatever you want to call it. Or three, the mind sees the data, does its processing, and then in a no mind state, somehow meditation leading to intuition, we can feel that we know the truth. But are we being deceived? So that's the issue. Let's, number one, talk about how do we get to something we believe is true?
Well, the thing about the conditioned mind is it's kind of like you wear a certain color of sunglasses, don't you? Yeah, if you wear dark sunglasses, you see the world dark. If you wear green sunglasses, you see the world green. So as such, the answer is pretty simple. We need to learn to turn off the filter. Yeah, but the filter obviously has been conditioned into us through the society software, right? Through the belief system that has been fed to us since we're children. And we are made to being identified with that, because otherwise we get punished. Oh, you step out of the belief system, or you think you're intuitive. Who do you think you are, right? You better, like, if we are in the hamster wheel, you better be also in the hamster wheel, right?
Right.
So the thing is, this is something that people who are analytically gifted, who have a very gifted discriminatory mind, they don't like to hear this, but I'm going to be strict about that. The discriminatory mind cannot penetrate truth. This, as such, is impossible.
Well, that's why I brought up these 3 points. You either can do it with your mind, you got to do it with no mind, or there's some combination, right?
But the thing is about the rational mind is a tool. So the thing is, I can pick up a tool or not. But for most people, they cannot pick up the tool. They are controlled by the tool. Right. So, for example, if my only, you know the saying, if my only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
So if I look at the world through the rational mind is discriminatory. And to make it clear is the rational mind has a 1 and 0 system, a black and white system, a duality system. And this system came into being through biological evolution. And the reason is very simple, survival. So we separate the world into pleasure providing or nurturing and what endangers us. And of course that creates a very black and white ideology perception. Right. Because then we started building belief systems. These belief systems tell us who the evil ones are, and they're usually external, they're not us. So suddenly we start, let's say, exploring the world based on the survival instinct. So either way, we perceive something as friendly or something that scares us, but we cannot escape the dualism. And this is what creates our suffering, because we're seeking out the pleasure. Yeah, the Buddha described it very, very clearly. You desire, therefore you suffer. So we seek the pleasure. And when we're not in a state of pleasure, we're in a state of fear. So we're bouncing between these 2 states, but these are lower evolutionary states. But our belief systems are made in a way that they keep us on the survival instinct level. They keep us trapped there.
Well, I want to talk about beliefs in depth when we get to that. As a follow-up, so basically what I heard you say was a conditioned mind alone, not possible to access truth. Agree?
Yes.
Number 2, no mind only can give you access to a higher state of awareness, and we're going to have to talk about what that is, or consciousness. We're going to define it. But is that, how does that non-mind translate into a truth if truth can only be defined in terms of, well, can truth even be defined in words? Can it be described in, I don't know that it can.
Absolutely not. That's the point.
Okay, so number 2, it says the only way to access truth is through non-local reality of a no mind. At the same time, we say that, and then we expose that to our intuit. This is our extrasensory type perception, whatever we want to call that. And I think it goes back to a primitive organ that we have that involved survival in our reptilian brain that also extends into the stomach area near the dantian, where you have the ability to determine whether something is good or bad, right or wrong for you at a primitive level. It doesn't involve the mind. And it may be strictly only survival, but it seems to go beyond that, like a woman's intuition. Okay, when we describe that, or your own intuition, a man's as well. Generally, when you tune into that, whatever that is, it's your higher self whispering in your ear, or whatever you want to call it. It seems to generally be right for the person's path if they listen to it, or at least they seem to report that. Okay, what do you think about that? So how do we go from no mind experience of what is to intuition and guiding your process?
Yeah, this will be a bit complex. So I will have to go a bit deeper on this. So let's say the no mind is the foundation. You wipe the board clean. You let go of all prejudices, of all preconceptions. You wipe the board clean. Now from that moment on, there is a gap. Think of it like this. If you have a room and you stuff this room full with furniture, you cannot put new furniture in, right? There is no place. So while your brain is full of thought, you cannot perceive. This thought blocks deeper levels of consciousness out.
Is that why when you get older that you have to forget something to make room for something new?
Yeah, kinda.
You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Yeah, go ahead. No,
well,
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is like if I'm very attached to what I consider knowledge, think about it like what the church considered knowledge in the Middle Ages. Think about the conflicts that were like with scientists like Galilei or Copernicus at the time. Mm-hmm. It's like there is an attachment to what we perceive knowledge, but we in truth do not know. We think we know. We have attached to that. So since we draw identity from those concepts, we block truth out because truth endangers our identity. Once we know truth, the identity cannot survive. We go beyond identity. Mm-hmm. And this is the reason why a lot of people do not step out of their cage. They're scared of that. So then let's speak about what intuition is. Let's say the moment I wipe the board and I enter a no-mind state, then let's say I'm not concerned with time anymore. I'm completely present in a moment, so as such, the timeless dimension arises within me. So whatever is the timeless part of me suddenly has a foot in the door. It can enter the time-space reality. So once it does, I have a connection to my source self. Now, the interesting thing that happens, that we suddenly, and I speak to clients who have those experiences, suddenly they make gestures that are not like their own, like of the identity. They know things that are not of the identity. They're very confused about this. Mm-hmm. But what they do not understand is that there is memory. And today, in an internet terms, we say there's memory in a cloud. There's a server where the memory is uploaded and it's not localized in the brain. Mm-hmm. So if I go into a no-mind state, what is actually intuition is a door that has been opened where the timeless you can enter space-time consciously. And from that moment on, it starts modifying the body. And then we're on the path of conscious evolution. Before evolution is unconscious, but from that moment it becomes conscious. Because consciousness itself starts shaping the body, so it actually impacts matter. Yeah, so once that happens...
You got ahead of me, and we were going to talk about mind-body stuff here for sure, because that's an area I definitely want to spend plenty of time on. So,
all right, we'll get to that.
Can you say in clear terms for the audience how we go from no mind experiencing this universal consciousness, and you put any label on it you want, there's information in that consciousness, and you and I both know it, how that goes to us determining what is true or not true for ourselves. Okay. So for me, I think the no mind state actually is related to possibly accessing what Dr. Straussman called the dimethyl or the DMT spirit molecule in your pineal gland. So advanced yogis had this experience, and I read about this many years ago until I had it. This blissful experience was possible if your pineal or your seventh chakra was on. That's in general. I'm being very terse in the definition, okay? And so I read this book, and sure enough, Dr. Straussman believed that there was somehow a relationship between the pineal gland that wasn't working normally and the one that was producing dimethyltryptamine that's giving people spiritual experiences, and profound spiritual experiences too.
Yes.
And he wrote a fantastic book, so I recommend that. But from that standpoint, I believe what he described was a electrochemical transductive wave that is our interface to the electromagnetic spectrum through a physical organ in your brain. It's a transducer, if you will. So I think that's probably a physical connection that we can talk about that leads to this intuitive connection that is part of what we call intuition. And it creates an extreme kind of knowing that could easily lead to a belief system if you're not careful.
Okay, I'm gonna say something that for a lot of people is still very far out, but it's important to speak about it because then it makes more sense if we speak about intuition. So I said to you before we started the show, what I consider intuition is a very clumsy word for a huge spectrum of psychic ability that, let's say, mainstream science has no clue of as of yet. Yeah. And of course, for every, let's say, connection with deeper layers of consciousness, we have a material representation. So of course, our consciousness has gateways into matter, into the physical body, and the chakra system has a lot to do with it. So when we start using higher chakra levels, let's say from the solar plexus upwards, let's say heart chakra, throat chakra, third eye, crown chakra, we start elevating our level of consciousness because deeper layers of consciousness become accessible to us. But it begins with the no mind. And the reason why it begins with the no mind, because now suddenly we have surrendered our ego, we have surrendered our attachment and investment to time, because this is only where the ego can exist. It exists in the story of past and future. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So if we surrender this, suddenly the deeper you, and this you is also individualized. I want to be very clear about this. This deeper you that has a way greater memory bank than most people could ever imagine has now a chance. It gets the foot in the door, and now it slowly, through the meditation process, starts modifying the body, activates the chakras, so it can express itself fully in this experience here. So
Oh, go ahead. There was a little bit of delay, but I want to talk about the physical part of that when you're done.
Right. We can definitely get into that. But what is really important to understand, what is intuition? It is a memory bank that is far greater than your current local memory, because you're not one person, you are hundreds of people. You just have amnesia about it. Because again, this knowledge is stored in a cloud in another dimension. On a server, let's say it that way. And you can only access it through meditation. But from that moment, we first experience it as intuition, and at a certain point, it becomes very concrete, because suddenly we know things and do things that we didn't know we were capable of, because they come from other incarnations, like this memory is still around. But now the door is open, right?
Yeah, actually, two things. I just saw an article recently where it was talking about genetic memory, that they were able to sense and verify that genetic memory is real, and it can be passed on through even mice when they train them a certain way. They can train them to do something, and somehow the offspring know how to do this, having never been exposed to it at all, even after the mother and the rest of the families died. It's like the 100 monkey theory, where they, this island where these monkeys started washing their potatoes in the water before they eat them to get the sand off, and all of a sudden it started spreading around other islands, and they had no idea how that was even possible. Anyway, you were talking about something really spectacular relative to consciousness and the mind-body connection. And I think before we get into that heavy, I had that listed in here, and it may be a whole nother show because it's fantastic. I think we ought to consider backing up and talk about what we think evolution is and what we think consciousness is. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start talking a little bit about my experience with evolution. It turned out to be something I was really focused on in college. I didn't really know why. So much so that my graduate program and my thesis work was in evolvable hardware. So I had studied evolution to the point where I could model it with, I don't know, genetic algorithms. Do you know what those are?
Explain it to me, please.
Okay, a genetic algorithm is essentially works from the precept that when a populace is being created, you have the parents and then you have the progeny. And the model for evolution was, well, there's some mutation in the zygote or the embryo that causes features that nature supports or doesn't support. And therefore, if it's supported, it shows up in the species. So you can create in software populaces, spawn off children, and then expose them to various life functions. You know what I mean? Life functions. So, and if they don't pass the life function, then they're killed off. Okay. So in that process, in these genetic algorithms, essentially you can take a chromosome, okay, or a pair of them, and start mixing them, and then go, well, okay, they mix this way, they combine this way, and then if I put a little mutation right here, and you can put the mutations in randomly. Imagine doing this with a computer system, okay, with a very long genetic string of ones and zeros representing A, T, C, and G, okay, like that. And so I was doing this in college, and I discovered a couple of things. Number one, sometimes because I was using a stochastic process and it was in a loop trying to collapse and evolve the right brain connections to do some function, sometimes it wouldn't collapse. It couldn't find the answer. It would go on too long. So the idea of getting evolution to work in real time is not something that works well with machines yet, but as they get faster and faster, it's possible. So what I found also was that it's not possible for a species to be exposed to an overnight climatic change if the mutation was happening in the embryo, such that that's how the changes were being perpetuated through a populace, okay? That if, for instance, if the temperature changed from very warm tropical to all of a sudden frozen, how could a reptile survive, for instance, you know? So there are certain catalysts that came about that made me realize that evolution is not just happening at the embryo state, but it's possible to change biology real time. And then I was looking at, for instance, the studies they did with chicken eggs and salamander eggs, how they could change them. Yes, they were at the zygomatic state and they were at the cellular division state at various stages, but they could introduce a environmental stressor and cause that biology to elicit a feature that would not normally happen unless it was needed for that environment. You know, so a chicken can be influenced to take on teeth like a dinosaur and its feet look more like a dinosaur, which is in its ancestry, which is very bizarre, and similar changing salamanders to frogs and things like that. So we know this is possible. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I found out a lot about evolution, and I was looking at human evolution, of course, as models to say, well, how could this be? And so for me, I believe I think there's a mixture of evolution. I do believe there's an adaptation of a biological species to its environment. It can happen at the time of embryonic development, or it can happen in an extreme situation to a mature biological species. For instance, if you turn a pig loose in the wild that's been tamed in a barnyard, they go from looking, you know, very clean and not clean, but they don't have tusks and coarse boar's hair like they do when you release them in the wild, and they go feral as a feral animal, right? Because now they have to survive, they have to live off the land.
Gerald, does it disconnect?
Let me leave my video off for just a second and we'll just talk, okay?
All right.
Okay, so where I was leading to that was, for me, what is evolution? I believe it's an adaptation of a species to a environment that's changing. And that doesn't mean that so people go, well, what about evolution versus creation? Well, they're not mutually exclusive. If a species is evolving like a Neanderthal, and a higher consciousness being saw them, mix their DNA with them, they would change their evolutionary path by a significant amount. Hybridization can do that. So what do you think about that? So I don't think Darwin was completely wrong relative to the species, and we can see adaptation in the species in nature. I think that's a reality. But I think evolution it's more than just the environment causing a stressor and then the species changing. First of all, who designed the life in the first place? Or where did the life come from in the first place? Because if you really study nature, you can see that some species have an intrinsic, what you would call a program that they just run, and there's no reflective learning, nothing. Whereas other species can be exposed to, like a bird can be exposed to another bird and imitate its sound, so they can learn. So there's a mixture of those in nature, and there's a mixture of that in humans as well. And I want to recommend a book. It's called The Territorial Imperative, for those who haven't read it. And it really goes into this very deeply about the evolution of man and species, and how we very much have a primitive part of us that's easily triggered for those who know how we're configured. You know, for instance, we have to have an identity. We have to have territory so that food is accessible, and we'll defend that territory just like an animal. And then we need stimulus. That's where the circus and the bread come in. So if you have all three of those things, you can have a quasi civilized species. But if you threaten any one of those, you're going to have chaos, especially the first two, right? Identity and territory.
Well, that's tribal psychology. Yeah. And tribal psychology is one of the biggest issues that exists on this planet today. This is the attachment to identity. And this is where we leave selective evolution, that is unconscious evolution, because this is evolution determined by our environment.
Well, I want to challenge that. I think it's more than the environment. What I'm leading to in this book is what it states is that we have some genetic programs that are running that are primitive in us, just like a cat that will defend its territory. Look at people that live in remote places that have plenty of space versus the ones in the city. There's a huge difference in their energy. You know,
obviously,
things like that. So anyway, I don't want to dwell on that, but I think it's more than just a psychology. I think there's a genetic construct to us where we have a programming, just like animals do, relative to those three things I just described.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't disagree with that. I'm just simply saying tribal psychology is a result of that genetic makeup. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's
right?
Exactly right. I think that's the basis for it, and it's worldwide. Right. It's not it's not isolated.
So here's the thing. So if we understand that tribal behavior is based on genetics, then it's based on the identity of the physical vehicle. And this is exactly where there is a turning point in evolution. So when we're still busy with survival instincts, we're very attached to identity. We're very attached to tribal psychology. We're very attached to being part of a group. We're very attached to having signs or, like, let's say something that makes us recognize our group and recognize other groups.
That's the identity. That's the identity
exactly
part. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So based on our biology, we are very entrenched in me or us and other. And this is the dualism that I spoke about earlier. That is exactly the cause of most suffering on this planet today. Now, there is a turning point in evolution, and I want to get into that. Let's say while I would say that most of the evolution of the biological vehicle is determined by the environment, at a certain point, the biological vehicle becomes intelligent enough to find its source of awareness, to find what animates it. And this is the turning point, because from that moment on, we start transcending the identity, and that consciousness, when we find it, starts modifying the biological body. So from that moment on, we remove a random element and a higher intelligence comes in that starts transforming the body. And you can see this in India over thousands of years with their yoga practice.
Right.
They have made it a science to modify the body, right?
I want to talk about that modification of the body. Before we get into like structural integration and stuff like that, from what I can tell, Julian, there's more than just a cellular and chemical process to creating this meat that stacks on this host, okay? From what I can tell, the DNA is significantly affected by frequency, and every life form probably has a frequency that says, well, this is your frequency that animates your DNA, that causes the cellular process to start happening. It's not just chemical. And then the energy template of that thing is what specifies how the DNA attempts to build it, from what I can tell. And the reason I say this, I never would have thought that before. This came through experience of structural integration, where you change the malleability of the body, and all of a sudden the energetic template starts feeling like your body is merging with that. It's probably like people who have lost a limb that can still feel the limb, you know, like that. It's like that. It's almost like, it's crazy. But I think in terms of evolution, I think that not only could the chemical process be causing us to, as species, to adapt, not from just the environment, partly from genetics, but I think also from a genetic standpoint, if you consider that there is a potential in the human DNA to be sensitive to energy, then it's possible to encode in that DNA exposure to energy, frequency, sound, even a word through cymatic vibration could potentially change the DNA. So what I want, and we know this from cymatics, okay? So, so this gets really kind of crazy in terms of evolution. So if what I want to put out there is, if the energy that's animating all life is changing, guess what? All life will change with it.
Yes.
And so this is a topic that's kind of beyond this show for today, but that led me to some deep inspection of solar system physics and how the how the life of a star lives, and how analogous as above with a sun is analogous to how our pathway is in terms of finding this awareness, recognizing this, changing the body. So what you've pointed out agrees with the research that I was doing in college on the evolution of a genetic species in terms of being able to change real time. So I think it's not just at mutation. And I think this is where Darwin was probably too limited. I don't think he had the understanding to go beyond that. So, so if you were to give a term or a short definition that we can both agree on what evolution is before we define consciousness, what would it be? What would you say?
I would say it's spiritual gravity. It's gravitation to the accumulation of spiritual energy.
Okay.
So
you obviously are focused on energy. I was hoping you would include both physical, because then we would do the spiritual, energetic part afterwards. So.
Well, the thing is, obviously it's intermixed, and obviously matter is just energy in a certain state. It's being trapped in a certain vibration, right?
Right.
So,
well, you and I both believe that's kind of a truthful place and the stopping place in the dialogue, but a lot of people don't believe that. They believe there's just this, and when you die, that's it. There's all this idea of afterlife, multiple incarnations. There's a bunch of hogwash, new age psychobabble. Okay, so so that's why I want to make sure we define our terms, because I don't think it's helpful for people to think the kind of stuff we're talking about is psychobabble. All right, it's not. It's, you can put a label on something and dismiss it, but we're gonna make that really hard for people to do by the way we're doing this. Okay, not that we're trying to convince you of anything. We're exploring some concepts that I think are generally applicable to all of humanity. And so, as terms of evolution, spiritually, you say it's spiritual gravity, and spirit, in my way of thinking as an engineer, is energy. We can call it spirit, you call it energy. Okay, but wait, okay, so the evolution of this, we know through the aging process that you born, you live, you might contribute to the DNA pool and the dialogue on the wall, and then you die, right? That's one model of it. Of somebody who doesn't believe in multiple incarnations, okay? Whereas if you start talking about evolution and you realize that you have the experience that we're talking about, that's when this bridge happens, where you realize this isn't all there is. There's life after death. We're eternal. We're energy bodies. And not only that, those energy bodies move in a evolution as well, a transition from, I don't know, kind of a low state to a state that we consider higher. And how do we know this? Because we exercise reflective consciousness, and we can see that what we used to think and used to believe doesn't fit very well with where we are now. And it goes on and on and on. It keeps repeating your whole life, right?
Right.
So,
well, for those who are skeptical, look, I used to be very skeptical as well. I was very scientifically oriented. And I remember when I was going through my psychotherapy education, I was very strict on any colleagues who had esoteric ideas. I was saying, you're irresponsible, you're not using techniques that are verified, you're taking care of other people. How can you be confident in those things that you teach if you cannot verify it? So as such, I will be very clear on the matter. I will say, I don't want anyone to believe a single thing I say. I want anyone out there to develop the techniques so they have direct access, so there is no middle person, no preacher, no scientist, no person of authority in between. Go out, kill the Buddha, stop believing, find out, give away the crutch of belief.
Right.
Because here's the thing, and this is how I do this in psychotherapy. When I teach my clients meditation techniques, I don't tell them what it leads to, because that will create beliefs. It doesn't help. It just creates another bias. It just creates another blockage. Yeah. And it might create resistance. And then because they're resisting something that is an actual phenomena, they're not getting better. But of course, I want to assist them in their personal evolution, yeah, as a being. So as such, I give them that technique, and then they can verify it through direct experience. So it's not about the transmutation of concepts. We have done this long enough. We have created enough scriptures. This does not serve humanity. What humanity needs is techniques that give direct access to those experiences. And several techniques we have discussed, for example, psychedelics, right? And you talked about that, and I know this from personal experience, that through certain meditation exercises, I come into psychedelic states, and I have psychedelic experiences too, so I can compare it. So once you realize that psychedelics are a chemical key that unlock the limitation of the nervous system, that suspend the belief, so in that moment you can get into deeper mind states. Once you figure that out, well, then you might think, I don't want to rely on the substance, because this creates a form of limitation for myself. So then people get determined about doing yoga, about doing certain Buddhist meditation techniques, or getting into shamanism, or whatever it is, but they develop their own tools to directly access the mystical experiences. So there is no person that translates this to them. And in these translations, not only will it create errors, but we cannot rely on the translators, because they might have an ego attachment. They might have an interest in power. They might have an interest in institutions.
Yeah, well, exactly. And at that point, this is how I see sharing information is you can share your experience, and it's not to help somebody else, really. I mean, it might have that impact, but really it's because we're having this experience and we want to share it, right? Because it's unique to us. And sometimes they cross over, and you can see, like, from your background in psychotherapy and my background coming at this from, I don't know, an electrical engineer, that we've arrived at the same place. And we use different language and things like that for the most part. That's why I'm trying to make sure we got a couple of terms in here that we can make sure we're on a similar. So in terms of evolution, I would say spiritual gravity for the energy, and possibly an adaptation to environment and or genetics for evolution for biology. And we see this in plants too. Okay, so that's fine. Are you okay with that? I mean, do we have to go any further than that?
Well, let's say, I think to get a little bit more into this, see, the selective process is in itself creative. And of course, it has created a huge variance in life form. So it's a huge variance in experience. And this is in the interest of consciousness, because consciousness uses this variance in experience as a mirror, as a form of reflection to get to know itself. So you have several species, and they evolve to a higher complexity. So, and when they reach a state where they can realize the source of consciousness, so mystical insight enters their life, maybe through psychedelic plant use, maybe through meditation. But suddenly they realize the source of consciousness. From that moment on, evolution becomes conscious, because then we make a conscious decision that we're now on the endeavor of finding out. So then we are not subjected to, like, as, let's say, the selective thing, the thing that we call the random factors, they don't determine us anymore. We go beyond them. And from that moment on, we start modifying the body, and of course this leads to something else, but we can stop it there.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because I found personally that experiencing it was, I actually experienced it before I actually gave it a mental construct. So the idea that changing the body, that there's a mind-body connection, I want to talk just a little bit about that. And it turns out the work I was doing in structural integration was renowned for that. And I wasn't aware of that, actually, when I started it. So that was a total surprise to me. But the first place I got exposed to this was in a book by Ida Rolf, where she said when you started changing people's structure, that their personality would change. And you being a psychotherapist, that you probably are aware of that, but most of them don't accept that. Personality is a fixed thing, right? That's your concrete filter that you see all your life through, right? Well, all of a sudden, when the body starts changing, there's some connection to, I don't know, the flexibility of the body and the flexibility of the mind. They're very, very related. And actually later on, if you study the epithelial tissue from which the skin comes from, it originates in the same material that produces the brain. So the idea that the skin is the surface of the brain, that's another one to kind of think about for yourself, because, you know, the sensations on that, there is. And the other part that I noticed was and I want to talk about quantized consciousness in the chakras. As those started changing, the endocrine system changed. My endocrine system changed as a function of that. And one of the most profound things that happened to me, that I don't know if it happens to other people, and it took me back to Dr. Straussman's work, was my whole life I've been very sensitive to getting sunburned. Okay, I could not go out and stay hours in the sun without getting sunburned ever. And I had freckles on my skin all my whole life and all like that. And right after, about a year after I had structure work and all these crazy things were happening in my body and my pineal glands firing and all this, and I'm having the mystical experience, like floating around, I noticed that suddenly the melanin production in my pineal gland changed somehow, where I could go out and spend hours and hours in the sun, and I not only did not get sunburned, but I got very, very dark and tanned. I was like, what happened? That is so unusual. It reminded me of a chameleon that could readily change its melanin level to adjust how much solar energy it absorbs as a function of how warm it is, right? That's what they do. And so somehow this happened to me, and I was like, wow, you talk about an actualization of an experience of mind-body change, that one blew me away. So, and I've had many, many, many other ones too that happened, but there very much is, and I want people to walk away with is, your personality is not fixed, and it's a function of your consciousness, the filter you see life through, your experiences. And this brings us to an issue that I really want to talk with Julian about. And he mentioned that your belief systems end up as memories, and that there's an accessible, larger space of data, which you called memory. Well, the idea of what memory is in a human, it turned out to be an area that I studied in college with my first faculty advisor when I was in the computer engineering program. And this was an area called Bi-Directional Associative memory. And what they had done in the cognitive science department, the electrical engineering, and the computer science department, they had come together and figured out, well, let's model the human senses and see if we can figure these things out, right? So this was the cog sci department, leading to things like situational awareness. How do you do this in a computer versus a human, and all this kind of stuff, okay? So in general, we had a model where we had a sense, process, and actuate. So the sensing is done with your 5 sensors, okay? Your eyes, your ears, your skin, what you're feeling, your taste, and all that. Those come in, they turn into chemical, electrochemical signals. Your brain processes it, and then if there needs to be something done, you can send a signal to an actuator, like your hands or your legs, and so you have sensors and effectors, and the effectors can move you around in the 3D space. And this is generally what was done with a robot. Well, in that process, the idea of how the memory works is very critical to understanding our consciousness, our personality, and the filter that we see life through. And this was an area of research that we looked at. And, you know, it turns out that in the cortronic region of the brain, where the pyramid cells are, in that little 3 millimeter region of your brain, and the connections there are absolutely epic. And they have modeled those such that we can go from seeing something in the world, affiliating it with a token space that might be a matrix of 1s and 0s that are on or off. Think of about it as a matrix of a 64 by 64, a really small one. And there's maybe only 5 of the squares in that matrix that are on, representing a beach ball at sunset. Okay, you see what I'm saying? And if you go closer to it and look at it from a different angle and experience it, we end up training our memory based on the physical world that stores these tokens that can then be recalled in context. So this is the bi-directional part of it, whereas we see somebody drowning, or we see a piece of information, or a beach ball, or a person we recognize, it brings up a token from our memory that then brings it to the current context, so that we can associate all the neurons that are connected to that. Oh, that's a good experience, that's a bad experience, whatever. Yeah. Right? So the problem with the memory is, like you said, we carry forward all of our conditioning with that and then continuously see life through that filter. And and there are ways around that, like Julian's talked about, by having a no mind state, because the computer, your computer needs time, like you said. It wants to chew on something that happened before, data that's already recorded, or it might want to extrapolate the future to gather some data so it can predict what's going to happen, right? But it's not helpful now, right?
Right.
So that's when you want to turn it off, is when you don't need it.
Well, and the thing about it, the memory, well, we have a very limited idea of memory because we know very little of it. And the only memory that we know is our own. So we don't understand other types of intelligence that are not human-like. You know, when certain scientists try to project, let's say that they say, well, Earth is in a certain habitual zone, this is why life exists, they already limiting the idea of what life is. Like life needs to be in that atmosphere, needs to be that far from the sun. This is already a very tremendous limitation, and it comes from our memory based on our bias from our biological system.
That was before they found that microbes could live in a rock, chew on minerals, and live for thousands of years with no outs. It's like, wow. Yeah, I totally get you. Yeah. So what is the definition of life? We still don't even have. We have a working model of a definition of life, but we haven't seen the full aspects of life to be able to say, well, does it have dimensionality? Can it live with a body, without a body? You know, is that life? Because it gets pretty deep there, right? So
I would like to shift the idea of consciousness, like the concept that we have of consciousness. I would like to shift it in a little bit of a different direction, because our brains, we're very convinced in our materialistic Western approach that the brain produces consciousness. Yeah, I can tell from direct experience that this is not the case. And of course, I say again to all the viewers, don't believe a single thing I say. Figure it out for yourself. Access these states for yourself. Yeah. So
can I stop you there and ask you to define consciousness, and then I want you to comment on whether you think it's quantized at the chakra levels and outside of the body. Does it continue? Are there multiple levels outside of the 7 levels or 13 levels that we have in the body? So what's your definition of consciousness? And you can use awareness and perception and all that, because we're going to have to define those too if you do that. But go ahead. So let's talk about
consciousness is the one factor that you cannot subtract from any experience. Yeah, no matter what you experience, it is being witnessed. Yeah, no matter if you're in a dream state, if you experience yourself on drugs, whatever you experience, this experience is witnessed. So that means consciousness itself cannot be accounted for in terms of something else. Consciousness is not dependent on the experience. I want to make this very, very clear. We draw identity from the experience, and that is ego. Oh, I have worked for 10 years in this job. This makes me now, whatever, a banker. I've been married to this wife for 6 years. This makes me a husband. So we draw identity from our experience and therefore limit our perception of consciousness. So when you speak about the body and how it impacts consciousness, it actually doesn't. It's more like that the body is our limitation. The body is limiting the expression of consciousness, but consciousness itself is not limited at all.
Well,
and consciousness.
What I wanted to say was, I'm not saying that the body limits the consciousness. I'm saying there's where the finite meets the infinite in the body is where we experience energy. And this is maybe, I got ahead of myself. Is consciousness simply a reflection on associated memory that's being brought up in consciousness, and by that reflection, it creates an awareness? Or is it something much bigger than that, that's an energetic, quantized thing that happens to happen at the junction in your body, at those nerve ganglions we call chakras? And when I say quantized, I'm meaning there's a level of consciousness that seems to go with each chakra. Okay, so and this is kind of coincident with atomic molecules from the periodic table of the element. is that they have quantized states of energy. They're not continuous between the states. And for some reason, that's very odd. So why isn't consciousness on a continuous spectrum instead of a quantized level? You know what I'm saying? Is it
Okay.
how you
well, here's the thing. I'm trying to think about it a little bit because, again, English is not my first language, so I'm trying to find appropriate words. See, you are focusing on the in-between. You're not focusing on consciousness directly. See, since there is a multi-layered, a multi-dimensional experience, there are in-between states where there is a fluid interconnection between those dimensions. The chakras are where the energy is streaming in. Yeah? And when you speak about vibration and frequency, it's very interesting. For example, if you see Buddhist monks chanting a mantra or Hindus chanting a mantra, they do it in a certain tone. So it is a vibration, so it will stimulate a certain chakra. Right. So I figured that out through using tones. I would use specific tones to stimulate certain chakras, so open the gateway. Absolutely. But this is the only thing I do. I open the gateway. What is beyond the gateway is complete. And what is beyond the gateway, I am not modifying. I am not changing it. They're in between states where you see, you like to say, and this is a beautiful way of saying it, where the finite meets the infinite. So where meta meets the unlimited awareness. So if you're familiar with Terry Pratchett had this a very beautiful part in a book where he said, where the falling angel meets the rising ape.
Yeah? That's a good way to say it. Yeah. Well,
it's very beautiful.
Yeah. So at that place, whether it's quantized into steps or not, what I found is my experience is it is. Like and you could tell in your body where you were getting blockages and when they were opening up. So like you could definitely tell when it made it to your throat chakra, right, for instance, and what happened while that was going on. So the idea that the chakra consciousness is quantized in steps, I believe that's true. But I also believe, and that this is just a theory, I guess it's not a belief that I hang or attach to, is that beyond the experience in the body, there are many, many layers of energy that we can experience that take us all over the galaxy, okay, in multiple dimensions. Right. So I think there's a large chasm between once you leave the body and actually getting to the place where you're as far along as you think you're ever going to be relative to the source. And it's so the body and the material experience, maybe it's only 7 steps, okay? But I think there's much more to it than that. And so that really points to the fact of what you're saying is that our experience of the whole is quantized in this dimension such that we only get to experience A to B in the evolution of our consciousness. And that's partly why we brought up this idea of consciousness. And I believe consciousness is from the creator of all, a creator of some sort, and it's energetic. And these meat hosts are a place where you can have a bi-directional experience with that energy. And like you said, it's the only way to access something that can't be described in words. And we call that truth or the meaning of life or whatever. But until you experience that, you can't even describe that to somebody because you can't describe the way something tastes. Right. So how are you going to describe that?
But let's say we can try to use some metaphors. Let's speak of it in terms of wavelength. Think about it like when we started to develop technologies of communication. First there was the telephone, right? Or like the using telegraphy lines. Yeah. So we started developing communication, and this communication was based on a certain wavelengths. So later you had the TV, so you add visuals to it. Later you have the internet, then we have video games. So basically with let's say, if the channel is wide enough, we experience less and less fragmentation of that information. So if I would tell you that we could say every chakra has to do with a certain wavelength, so with a certain channel of information that can get through. Now, the consciousness itself is not determined by our material experiences, but depending on how we change our frequency in the body, we can tune into those channels. So that means we are not developing that consciousness.
No.
We're opening the channels up by modifying the body, so the body limits the perception of the channels.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah, that's why I call humans meat modems.
Right.
It's not to be derogatory, but as a receiver in receiving energy, it seems like, and Thoth talks about this in the Emerald Tablets, that your bones transfer magnetic energy that he calls a kasa. So all of a sudden, I've always looked at the human structure as an electrical engineer and go, well, there's a central spine, you've got your ribs poking out there, and then you've got your sacrum that's very bizarre. It's like a waveguide with holes in it to cause poles and zeros in a Bodhi plot. Okay, right near what? Your first ganglion of impar, which is on your coccyx bone, sitting right there where that concentrator of this energy coming in through your ribs looks like it's going. Okay, I don't know if you know that much about, well, you know about wavelength. So the speed of light equals the wavelength times the frequency. So is it a surprise that the chakra wavelengths were known way, way back in time? And those wavelengths map to colors. It turns out they were the colors of the 7 segments of white light when they're separated by a prism. And those are the exact colors. Now, is that a coincidence? I don't think so. No,
not at all. Not at all.
Well, wavelength, since the speed of light equals wavelength times frequency, you can get the frequency by dividing the wavelength and the speed of light, and then you've got a sound, okay? You can get a sound frequency or binaural audio.
Yes.
So sound can change the wavelength or the frequency. Now, here's the crazy part, is somehow if you've got 7 chakras and each one has its own wavelength, well, it's got its own frequency too. Wavelength times frequency equals the speed of light. So that being said, not only will visual stimulus from light affect your DNA, okay, and your energy body, but also frequencies that are in the electromagnetic spectrum that can have an interaction with organs in your body that could interact with the electromagnetic spectrum. Like we talked about, the pineal gland is a electrochemical transducer that seems to be able to interact with this higher consciousness source, whatever it is, this energy, okay, this infinite intelligence. What name are we going to give this? Universal consciousness? That's kind of new age, and people don't like that.
See, I kind of just like to use the word source.
Source, okay.
Because there is no bias. There are no beliefs attached to the word of source.
Right. Thoth uses that as well. He calls it the infinite source, or
yes.
Later on he'll call it the creator of all, or the infinite intelligence, or whatever. Okay. Okay. So from that standpoint, I think we have a good handle on evolution and consciousness.
Yeah.
And that these even though these models may not be accepted by people who haven't experienced it, there were so many people that have experienced it, have written about it.
Yes.
And it's real for me, and it's real for you from your pragmatic experience. So I don't think it's theoretical anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's experiential.
Right. There's one thing I would like to add, because you spoke about a prism, right? So you have light, and the light is fragmented through the prism into aspects, right? So the fun thing is, this is exactly what I wrote in my book. So I spoke when I wrote it in my book about like light being in a sense fragmented into spectra. I also related that to sound by saying if we make tones in a certain vibration, we activate chakras, and they have to do with a certain frequency of light.
Absolutely.
So the thing is,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely,
and this is something that people can just try, because again, when Buddhists or Hindus use mantras, for example, it's not necessarily about the meaning of the word. Yeah, it's not about the context, what is being said. It's not like prayer. It has to do with a certain vibration.
Right.
For example, what I figured out, if I would just chant the U, for example, you have this ancient tone, the R-U-M, right? The Aum. And this is, you find this in Veda scriptures, in Hindu culture. Now, if you just chant the U, it's very interesting. The heart chakra starts resonating. So when you go like U, the heart chakra starts resonating. Now, the interesting thing is if you go RUM, it's like an octave, like a musical instrument. So you go from high to low. And you can feel this in your body when you're modifying the tones, that you feel the vibration, starts moving down from, for example, up here, down the central line to the lower energy centers. And this is something that everyone can verify for themselves just through practice. And at a certain point, they feel that energy because chakras will be activating. And you can very easily do this. You just check an image on the internet where the heart chakra is, like in the center of the chest. And then you try to create a vibration that is exactly located at that area. Now, the chakras are a junction. And when we understand that they are a junction, it's kind of like this is, let's say, this is another form of, I wouldn't say nervous system, not nervous system in terms of a physical sense. But these are data lines through which information travels and energy travels. So basically, the chakras connect the actual consciousness with the physical body.
Right.
And once we figure that out, we start opening them up, then we can suddenly tune into the deeper intelligence and we start remembering who we are.
Right. This is what I wanted to talk about in terms of the changes in the body. For instance, if you were to, and I wrote an equation for the maximal human energy based on, the chakra to me is a nerve ganglia that is essentially it's a receiver for external energy. Okay? That's
correct.
Really what it is.
Yes.
And,
very true.
Right. So I wrote an equation to show the relationship between your weight, gravity, wavelength, and frequency, period. And I wrote this in both of my books, but it turns out that what happens is mathematically is because of your relationship to gravity and whether chakras are on or not, could determine simply an energetic equation that says, well, if this one and this one, if everything above your heart chakra is not working, you're going to end up with a different consciousness figure in my equation. It's mathematical.
Yeah.
No, it's just essentially frequencies mixed. They're not isolated, okay? And a concept of frequencies and waves that are interacting is what we call the superposition principle. So if frequencies are the same wavelength, the same frequency, and they're in phase, guess what? The amplitudes are additive. Whereas if you offset them 180 degrees and the wave meets a crest, they'll negate each other, okay? So this is like, think about your chakras now. They're stacked together with 7 different ones, right, or more. Each one has its own wavelength, and if they're not functional correctly, it's possible that the phase or frequency or the wavelength is wrong and how you're receiving. It's like having a broken antenna, in your car.
Well, here's the thing. You speak about gravity a lot, and you say this plays a huge factor into structural integration, and you speak about the maximum energy potential that a human can develop, right? And you associate this with the chakras. So the higher in frequency we get, the less we're impacted by gravity, right?
Well, it's actually, well, I don't know that I can say that.
Okay. How would you say that?
What I would say, and I start from a Newtonian standpoint on gravity, okay? Simply how matter interacts with, and I'm not going to the quantum yet level, okay? I can definitely go there, but we don't need to. If we just assume that gravity has an effect on us, we've been able to model it on all matter for a very long time. Whether we can say what it is, that's another show, and I did a whole series on gravity, okay?
Right.
But weight, we know what weight is. We stand on the bathroom scale and it tells us what your weight is, right? Well, weight is equal to mass times gravity. Whatever gravity is for you, we call it 9.8 meters per second squared. So if you do that and you just get rid of that, all of a sudden you have weight divided by gravity equals mass. So we don't talk about E equals mc squared relative to us. We talk about it relative to nuclear bombs, right? It's just applicable, just as applicable to you, as matter, as it is to a. Okay. So starting from that,
let's get into that.
You want to get into that?
Yes, very much so, because you've been a fan of Robert Monroe, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Since I was 17,
so I started reading your book, Mercury Rising. Apologies, I got a little bit sidetracked by Monroe's third book, and he speaks about escape velocity. So escaping the pull of the Earth's sphere. So going beyond the Earth's sphere in out of body experiences, and I want to get to that.
Okay.
Because what do you see when you have a depressed client? To them, everything is heavy. Getting out of bed is heavy. Their body is bent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they seem to carry a very heavy load.
Mm-hmm.
And my suspicion is here, they think about past and future all the time. So they invest into time space. So they invest into matter. When you invest into matter, your attachment to physical reality is increased. So as such, you feel a heaviness. Now, when you see people, they go into higher energy states through meditation, through, for example, exercising kindness, and all these techniques that, for example, Buddhists have developed over centuries. So they start exercising those techniques. Then at a certain point, suddenly their body language starts changing. They stand very straight. They walk with a certain ease. They're not, let's say, as pulled down. It's very difficult to explain.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to explain.
No, I can explain it because you're over in my domain. Okay.
All right. Well,
I started talking about gravity, but let me finish that, and then let's get into that, because I have some, and this may be a whole nother show, Julian. We've been on for an hour and 37 minutes. So, but the idea that our relationship with gravity might cause a destabilization in our very primitive, basic constructs as a being starts from the time you learn to walk. Think about a child trying to learn to walk, and they're struggling against some force that they have to take almost a year to overcome to be able to walk. Whereas a horse is born, and by the next day, that newborn is able to stand up and walk. Now you compare that with a human experience. We have a very unstable relationship with gravity because number one, we don't know what it is, and number two, we don't respect it so that we have a relationship with it as a species. And I think there's some genetic issues there that came from our hybridization that led to that anomalous state, okay, in our bodies. But you talked about a client feeling the weightiness of their body. Well, guess what? When you tune into the now and you use your body to do that, and you've got a bad relationship with gravity, guess what? 90+% of people have back problems and musculoskeletal problems because they don't have a proper relationship with gravity. If they did, they would feel a light freedom, not tune into the now and feel like, oh my God, it's whipping my butt. And I look around and it's winning in every case. Nobody wins the war with gravity. You have to find the relationship with gravity to find peace with it.
Well, the thing is, everything you resist, you strengthen.
That's right.
So when we are, for example, in resistance to the physical experience, when we are in resistance to time space, we cannot transcend it. Everything that we accept, we start transcending. So the interesting thing is, for example, if someone becomes conscious of their depression and they accept it, they start transcending it. It's very interesting. So there is a shift in energy. And when you speak about the connection where the infinite meets the finite, that means where the consciousness that is not limited at all is connected to matter. When we increase in frequency, this let's say binding towards matter, it starts to lessen. Then we start having these mystical experience. Then people start having out of body experience, because the attachment to the physical body is lessened. The attachment to time, to identity, and this is where liberation comes.
Exactly.
So,
well, that's very important what you just said right there. Until a being experiences themselves apart from this and knows that it's eternal, they will not lose their fear of death. They'll still be chasing materialism, because when you finally figure that out, you realize everything that says in the spiritual practices that the body is an anchor, it's not important. Walk up to the flesh and you'll die. Walk up to the spirit and you'll live, from the Christians. It's the same thing. Okay, it's true. So so with this idea of gravity, though, if you have a proper relationship with it, mathematically, you cannot achieve your highest energy without having a proper relationship with gravity. That means this ease of posture that's talked about by Swami Yukasar and Babaji and the Buddha, that ease of posture means you've got an easy relationship with gravity, whether you're sitting, standing, or whatever.
Yes.
That is not possible if you don't decide it to be something of a focus of yours. Whether it's yoga, structural integration, whatever it is you have to do to make your antenna tune in better to the frequency that you're receiving. Do that. There's nothing more important than that, in my opinion.
Right. There's something that someone told me, and it's very simple, but it's very profound. Sometimes when I got tired in meditation, I would lunge over, kind of like this. So then suddenly, one of my friends that is connected with me tells me telepathically, a Buddha sits straight.
Mm-hmm.
And that keeps repeating every time. Let's say when the body has the expression of I'm exhausted, I'm resisting gravity, I'm out of energy. But let's say with the adjustment of the posture, we experience a lightness, we experience a change in attitude, we experience a shift in awareness.
That's right.
So when we start consciously adjusting posture, for example, if I tell a depressed client to just like when they walk, usually people look down when they're trapped in thought, right? So they're lunging over. If you just tell them to look straight ahead and to walk slower, because if you walk slower, you cannot walk from a program, you cannot walk from a conditioning. You have to
mindful walking, yeah.
Exactly. So in a sense, if you slow down your walking just by 10%, your program, your conditioning has no precedence for that. So you need to do it consciously. So you need to do it manually, right? And suddenly awareness enters. Suddenly the timeless enters. And when you then watch straight ahead instead of down, it's very interesting. Walking becomes easier.
Oh, you're gonna love our future discussions as we talk about some of this stuff. I've had years and years of experience dealing with clients and gravity and their interpretation of their energy and all this stuff. So, and visually seeing it with various imaging tools and such. So this will be a lot of fun. Either we probably ought to take a biology break so you can go to the bathroom, or maybe we could finish this one up today. And I think based on the list of things we have to talk about, I think we're going to have several shows. As a matter of fact, let's just talk about that right now. Do you see us doing a series of discussions like this for people?
Yes, because there's something we're doing here. Well, we are doing it in a microcosm, but there's something happening in a macrocosm. And this is the merger of mystical experience, of spiritual insight, and scientific progress. Because science is right now on the edge, on this fringe level of beginning to enter interdimensional experience. We're not there yet, but it's very important that we, for Western audience, start developing a modern language that makes these things understandable, relatable. Because a lot of the mystical writings, they have cultural context. They are trapped in the language at the time that we struggle to relate to. But modern science has developed a language that we can now, in a sense, merge with mystical insight. And in that sense, then we start unifying human consciousness. We start unifying Eastern and Western knowledge into a whole. So as such, I see your scientific approach, while you also have a spiritual approach. It's very important for this integration process, so humanity remembers.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that was one of the draws between us. We were probably brought together by forces just for that reason. And so I think we will continue doing some of these because, and really we're just sharing, right, across our two domains. But I feel like I found a lost brother, one of the others. So I'm really happy that we discovered each other. And do you have anything you want to say in closing? Tell them what the name of your book is and where they can find you so they can look you up.
Well, you can find the book on Amazon. It's called Beyond Psychotherapy, The Laughing God Behind the Masks. And the reason I call it The Laughing God Behind the Masks, because the mask is the identity. It's the physical body illusion. It's the brain in a body illusion that we attach to. So once we go beyond this mask, if you will, this identity, we find who we truly are. And this is source consciousness.
And that's where the laughter comes in, because it's really funny. I think we're like, if you think about, if you believe in aliens, if you think about an alien technology that could possibly have satellites that could zoom all the way in, look at your face, do facial recognition, detect your energy body, see which of your chakras are on, read your brain waves all remotely with telemetry. Listen, this is possible with humans now. You think they couldn't do it? So the idea that we're these little blips running around on a spherical globe, going through a simulator, trying to find our way out, and somebody could be watching from the outside and go, oh, look at that little blue one there. Isn't that interesting? Right. Let's meet them with this one over here and see what happens. It's totally possible. So anyway.
Well, the humor that you speak of, this is of course often referred in Buddhism as the laughing Buddha. It's when you have the sudden moment of insight that you're not a victim to this experience, that you're not separated from this experience, that you make a conscious decision to participate, and not at any moment you were actually endangered. Because then all the trouble that you've created for yourself, you have to laugh about it.
Right.
So I don't know if I said it to you in our in the last recording, but when you suddenly you say you can measure certain energy fields, well, at a certain point you can see them, especially through third eye activation, right? So a lot of times I have the situation, there's a client sitting in front of me and he tells me this very sad story. And they're very identified with it. And they're like, I'm a victim to my situation. I'm powerless. And I see the shining aura around them. So I see this little God complaining about the circumstances just because this little God has amnesia. this is where the humor comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. And the empathy too, to try to help them stop some of the suffering so they can get back in touch with their higher self.
Right. So and this is exactly what remains. This is what you made very clear. If we experience ourselves beyond the body and we know we're not threatened, we're not endangered, and this is an interactive holographic experience. It's the best label I can come up with right now.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Right? So once we figure that out, what else can we do but love?
Well, we can write simulations to affect the simulation. That's what I've got going on right up here.
Right. But it comes from a level of compassion and joy and passion, right? And it comes because you do understand that nothing can ultimately endanger you, so you can get rid of the limitation. You can fully express yourself. You can share the joy. You can share the love. And the compassion arises for those who are confused. Yeah. Right. And I always give the example of an Alzheimer client. And I find this very important. When you see an Alzheimer person and they've lost their memory, they're on the street, they're scared, you try to bring them home, they will resist it. They kick and scream because they lost all their orientation. But let's say when we start getting into past life memory and we experience ourselves beyond the body, then the general populace appears like the Alzheimer patient. And I don't mean this in a way, I'm not devaluating their experience. This is not what I'm trying to say. But they're at a certain stage of their experience, and we still have memory how it was to be so confused. And then compassion arises, then love arises.
Well, you know, actually, you use the Alzheimer's as an example. My son had a genetic disorder, and as long as all his needs were met, he was in a blissful state all the time. He didn't even understand the concept of fear. So there's there's that too. And that could give you a mirror into how a being can be that doesn't have a mental construct that's conditioned.
Right.
You know, so
everyone who has a pet knows this.
Exactly.
Everyone who has a cat or a dog, they're just in the moment.
That's right.
Nothing exists to them beyond the moment. So they're blissful, they're joyful.
Yeah, there's a good lesson there for sure. Well, listen, this has been an absolute pleasure. I wanted to let people know that your website is what? What's your website?
Julian, and then there is a
hyphen.
What's that?
Hyphen.
Yeah, hyphen. Okay, julianpolzin.de.
Yeah, that's Polzin. Okay. Julin Polzin. Okay. I've been talking a little bit more about you because I think we made this decision that we were going to do a few more shows. So I've been mentioning you, giving you a little tags on Facebook and things like that. So watch for calls out for me, and we'll just keep this going and see where it goes. And maybe we'll end up with a nice series. I don't know. But either way, I think it's going to be a fun process, and I think a lot of good stuff's going to come out of it. So you can find me at geraldclark77.com, like always. And with that said, I think we're going to let you guys go, and we'll catch you up on the next time. What do you say, Julian?
Yeah, all right. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Okay.